Hi, my name is Joe Abhold, and I would have to say that the nuns at the Catholic school I attended would probably be pretty surprised to hear my name mentioned anywhere adjacent to the word chaplaincy. I've been a Unitarian Universalist for about 25 years and a participant here in Eau Claire for nearly 10. When people ask me, what is Unitarian Universalism, my standard response is, we don't insist on professing a common creed to secure 5-star accommodations in the afterlife. Instead, we support each other as we strive to live by a set of shared values, to grow personally and make a difference in the world. Fundamentally, I tell them, it's not about what you believe, it's what you do that matters. All of the UU values apply to my work and life as a psychologist, but I'm going to focus on one, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, because the deep implications of this value can be difficult for many of us to center when we interact with people who are most in need of compassion. The people who've been most impacted by abuse from caregivers, suffer systemic injustice, are impaired by neurocognitive deficits, or have been dealt a bad deal by genetics, may have the most difficulty engaging with us and affecting change in their lives. Some are angry, some are immobilized, and some have just given up. This can be an issue for us because we tend to feel good about ourselves when our charity is clearly helpful and effusively appreciated. It's too easy to judge people who seem to reject our help or appear unwilling to change. When there is a problem, there is a natural tendency to try to figure out who or what is the cause, which makes sense. But this too easily slides into placing blame. We hear teachers blame students, parents blame teachers, politicians blame families, the housed blame the unhoused, some clergy blame society, and a lot of us, if we really reflect on it, sometimes blame those who are struggling with their inability to change, if they would just do such and such. I'm sure we can all recall a time when we were miffed when a friend, a parent, a child, or a person in need has not only rejected our help, but dismissed our efforts out of hand. At these times, we need to reconnect with the inherent worth and dignity of every person. The primary reason we became UUs was religious education for our children. We wanted them steeped in these values. One of my sons has made serving those with the greatest need his passion. He works in homeless encampments, does harm reduction, and provides services in a free community clinic in the cities. When I visit, we often go to encampments. A couple of years ago, we had a horribly cold and windy Christmas Eve. It was the combination of cold and wind that kills people on the street. We went to encampments at night to deliver supplies and see what we could do to help folks survive the night. The tarps a man had over his tent were torn and flapping in the wind, threatening to flatten his tent on top of his open flame propane heaters. After helping him secure the tarps, I sat in his tent to warm up. A woman who was dope sick because she was detoxing on her own came in because her tent had just burned down. Jordan was off helping someone else when she learned I was his dad, and she said, "What's Jordan's deal? Does he just go around helping people all the time? Just because he wants to?" I knew exactly what she was saying, and I've never had a more profound experience as a parent. About a year ago, I asked him how the UU values have influenced his life's course. He paused a moment and said, "I never really thought about it, but I don't think they do." I said, "Oh, okay." It's parenting, right? The next day, without prompting, he returned to the subject and said, "I've been thinking about it, and actually, they do. The inherent worth and dignity of all people. That's what it's all about." The implications of this value are radical. He has a quote from Eugene Debs tattooed on his body. It says, "While there is a lower class, I am in it. While there is a criminal element, I am of it, and while there is a soul in prison, I am not free. I think this is what it means to fully acknowledge the worth and dignity of every person, and I'm eternally grateful to Unitarian Universalism and these values for rippling through my life and into the world.
Next, we'll hear a reflection from Lisa Quinn-Lee.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lisa Quinn-Lee, and I am going to talk to you from my experiences as a social worker, mainly in the Twin Cities, and now as a UW-Eau Claire social work professor. As a social worker, our values that we go by are so inherently entangled and similar to UU principles, things like service and dignity and worth of the person and social justice, importance of human relationships, integrity and competence. I actually can't speak about social work without speaking about UU values, and I can't speak about UU values without speaking about social work. They're so entwined. And I'm just going to talk about a couple of them. I'm glad Joe talked about dignity and worth of the person, because I was actually feeling guilty I wouldn't have time to talk about that one today. So anyway, regarding service, with UU and as social workers, we serve, right? And we don't serve to be recognized. But in our code of ethics for social work, we are actually encouraged to provide part of our professional skills for free for others. And I think some of the most important time that I spent doing that was as a therapist in the Twin Cities. I would volunteer at the Minneapolis Free Clinic, the walk-in clinic, and I would get to be with people who wouldn't otherwise get mental health services. That was I learned the most, but I also received the most when I volunteered with people there. I also do a lot of volunteering in hospice and palliative care. Along with being a therapist, I spent a lot of my time working in hospitals and also in hospice and palliative care. Hospice, for those of you who don't know, are working with people who have a limited life expectancy. And I also spent a lot of time working with people who are grieving as well. So I still do a lot of volunteer work in that area. And then I think regarding social justice is the next thing I'll talk about. One thing that I learned in social work, actually by Dr. Don Maury here, sitting here, as my social work professor is, social workers, we don't just need to know about social justice. It's not about just learning about it. It's actually about challenging the injustice. That's really what I learned first as a student social worker is, again, not about knowing, but we need to challenge it. And so I've really, since that time, when I learned about there, went out to take action. And that's something that really strikes me in UU. It's about action. It's about doing and not just knowing. And so, some of the things that I do just on an everyday basis in my research, in my teaching, and in my service is talking about equity, diversity, and inclusivity, especially in this time of life right now. It's not easy to do that, but the more that people push against me, the more I teach to it. The more people say I shouldn't do it, the more I do it, right? So I think it takes courage today, but every single day, social justice is embedded in what I teach and what I challenge and what I do every day. I also want to mention with social justice something that I don't think always gets thought about. We often think about our work just individually, one-on-one with people or with families or with groups, that micro level, right? But we often don't talk about that macro level practice, right? That we need to work with communities and organizations, but also at that larger level. And I'm somebody that the micro level came very easy to me, the working one-on-one with people, but the macro level is something that I always have challenged myself to get more involved in, because we can't change things, right, unless we change things at the higher level. So I also do a lot of work with communities and orgs, but also at the level of politics and government and in the larger scale. One thing that I was also taught in the social work program was that voting is social work. And at first when I thought about that, and my students say the same thing, well, we can't tell people who to vote for, we have to be unbiased. our job is to make sure that everyone has a voice, right? That everyone is allowed to vote, that everyone knows how to vote. That so what I do as a professor is for my students, for the community, to whomever, I make sure they're educated about the issues, educated about what people stand for, and then get people registered to vote. I get people to the voting polls. I help them get ID. So I don't tell them how to vote or who to vote for, but I make sure that they have a voice and know how to. Now, in my personal life, I'm out rallying and I'm telling people who to vote for. I'm telling them what to vote for. I'm calling and writing and meeting with my representatives, very much so, right? But I think the voting and the macro level is something that's really important about that we often don't talk about. Let's see. And then I think lastly, I just want to talk about the importance of human relationships. That value, I think, is something that I'm most proud of. It's just me being a human being with someone else. In social work, we know that the most important piece of our work with clients is actually our relationship with them. It's our relationship with them that makes the most difference. And so these are things like just having the tools and skills to offer people, but doing it in a way that makes them feel heard and seen. And Maya Angelou, I'm sure a lot of you have heard this quote, right? I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think that is so key. How do we make people feel when we interact with them? We have to first build a relationship before we can do anything else. Now, do I sometimes get impatient? Yes, but we need to build that before we can do anything else. My biggest passion may sound strange to a lot of people, but my biggest passions in life are working with dying people, working with people who are grieving, and working with people who in suicide prevention, suicide intervention, and suicide postvention. Those are not easy, and people often ask me, like, why? And I think, why not? How can I not? It's really about companioning that person. It's about being with them on their journey, whatever that may look like. So in closing, I'm just going to tell you some concrete things that I do, and you don't need a PhD or a master's. You don't need higher education. You don't need a fancy title or fancy license to do any of these things. These are some of the things I do. I'm just a presence. I sit alongside them, with them. That alone is more than most people are willing to do. The other thing is I sit with them in their pain. I don't try to fix them. I sit with them in that pain. I'm also silent, which, as my family who is here can, I am very loquacious. I am not usually silent. It's amazing that I can do that, but I do that. I'm just silent. I sit next to them, with them, in their pain, and I'm silent. I just be. Some of the other things is, I may, if someone welcomes touch, I always make sure they do, I may just touch their hand or hold their hand. Some people have longed for touch, but don't get it. I may hold their hand, again, only if they want. But sometimes touch for many can be something that they haven't had for a very long time. In hospice, it was really neat. We had a wonderful massage therapist, but she actually taught all of us to do arm and hand and foot massages. And I thought, I'm a social worker. Is that in my role? Absolutely. Some of the most amazing times I spent as a hospice social worker next to dying people was giving someone a nice hand massage. That's it. And it helped them psychologically, right? Emotionally, spiritually, physically. Last two things is I really try to hold hope for people. One of the things that I have said many times in my life is, you may not have hope right now. I will hold that hope for you. I'll hold that hope for you. And that hope may look different. Some people may say, but Lisa, they're dying. What hope is there? There's absolutely hope. There's hope for a peaceful death. There's hope to see a loved one. There's hope for many things. So I often hold that hope for people. When I'm working with people who want to die, they may not have hope, but I have hope for them that they will get through this and that they will live. When people who are grieving the death of a loved one, I don't say, it's okay, it's okay. I sit with them and I have hope for them. Lastly, I think there's 4 things that I want everyone to know. I see you. I hear you. You matter. And you belong. And I'm going to end with one more quote. Brene Brown is one of my favorite social workers. She says, "Trust is earned in the smallest of moments. It is earned not through heroic deeds or even highly visible actions, but through paying attention, listening, and gestures of genuine care and connection." Thank you.
Good morning. I am Dawn Briskey, pronouns she, her, and hers. And when Julie asked me to talk about a month ago about the new work I've been doing as a volunteer in the community as a death doula, I hesitated because I haven't been doing this work like Lisa Quinn-Lee has for years, right? And I've been struggling with what to write, and I was up till 1:30 in the morning, and then this morning wrote and cut and pasted. So it's been a hard week for all of us, right? The closing of the hospitals is a rupture. It's a rupture in our community. For years, I have worked for nonprofit and with nonprofit organizations on the back end. I've helped the Emergency Nurses Association, the Society for Critical Care Physicians, Orthopedic Trauma Association, American Society for Hand Surgery, Orthopedic Association, and so many more organizations. I've helped them on the back end. I've helped them with operations and technology. I've helped their members serve communities, and I've been behind a computer. And I've come into communities like ours, and I've used those tools as a volunteer to help improve systems that we're using, bring in software tools, bring in ways to build our community, to make it stronger. And a part of me has been unsatisfied with that, as if I weren't doing enough. 2 years ago, a friend of mine was dying, and I hadn't seen her in years. I talked to her from time to time, and she was one of those friends I'd pick up the phone and call her, and we would just talk like we hadn't talked, had talked just yesterday. She was that kind of friend. We raised our children together when they were young. We only lived in the same community for 3 years. But I knew her for nearly 28 years. And one day I hadn't heard from her in a while, and I picked up the phone and called her. And she told me that she had metastatic cancer. And she didn't know how to tell me. How do you tell everybody you love that you're dying and that you don't know how much time you have? And I cried. And I had regrets. And she said to me, no regrets. She said, I believe we'll always be connected. And she said, we'll talk again. We'll talk after I talk to the doctors, after I find out more. And so after a few weeks, I called her, and she didn't pick up. And I called her again, and she didn't pick up. And I sent her a message. She didn't respond. Christmas, she sent me a short message. So I knew she was still alive. And then I reached out to one of her daughters after a couple more months. I mean, her cancer was severe. How could she still be alive? She was. And I really wanted to see her. And I wanted to respect what she wanted and what her family wanted. And so I didn't want to be pushy about it, but there was something inside that just kept saying, see her, see her. And so I asked if I could. And they said yes. And I drove over to Marshfield, where she was in a hospice facility. Her family had taken care of her at home as long as they could. And I spent the next 5 days with her and her family. When I drove over that first night to spend the night with her, I didn't know what I was doing. I went on Audible. I looked for a book about being with people when they're dying. And I found one by a Buddhist. It was the best book I could have found. And being a mother, being a compassionate person my entire life, I somehow just knew what to do. And as Lisa said, I just showed up. I just showed up. And I held her hand, and I sang to her, and I loved her and thanked her and let her know that it was okay. We didn't want her to go, but we knew she needed to. A week after she died, I learned that there was a profession called end-of-life doula, or death doula. I'd never heard those words before. People were paid to do what I had just done, or so I thought. As it turns out, it's an emerging profession. It's actually for about 20 years people have been working in this field professionally. We're not paid by insurers. Most organizations employ us as volunteers. But there is a movement, and it's growing, and the need is huge to just be with people. Not just, to be with people, right? When they're suffering, when they're about to lose somebody, when they've lost somebody, when they're facing their own death. So last year, I started changing my life. The universe helped. I walked into a window 2 years ago I didn't see, and I sustained a concussion. And suddenly, being behind 3 computer screens every day was no longer possible. And so after trying for a year and a half to regain the level of consulting I'd been doing, I stopped. And last year, somebody I didn't know said to me, "Have you ever thought of becoming a death doula?" And then the next week, somebody else said that to me, someone who didn't know me. And the signs became clear. And so I've just followed my intuition. I've shown up. I joined Threshold Singers. I'm a hospice volunteer for 3 hospice organizations in the community. I work with a woman who has dementia who doesn't recognize me from week to week, but she's happy to have somebody to visit her. And somehow I find a way to communicate with her, to laugh with her, to hold her hand, to let her know she's not alone. I don't know what this is going to mean for us. Maybe we'll have to sell our house. Laura's now supporting us as a medical editor. I'm still doing a little bit of consulting, and I'm fortunate because we do have some resources we can fall back on. But I know what's really important is to show up and to be here and to be present. And in our world today, more than ever, that's what really matters. That's what really matters. And so I'm letting you know, I am an end-of-life doula. I am a death doula. I can be with you now, no matter what your age, to talk to you about what it means to prepare for end of life. Because let me tell you, if you don't put it in writing, if you don't name your healthcare power of attorney in writing, if you don't put your wishes in writing, you've just reduced your chances of having a good death significantly. My daughter works at a large hospital outside of Boston. They have patients in the hospital who've been there for months because they didn't name a healthcare power of attorney. They don't have family. And they're waiting for the court to appoint guardians. I don't want that to happen to anybody here. I don't want that to happen to anybody I love. I don't want to see somebody I love trying to pull tubes out because they don't want it, but yet they haven't put in writing what they wanted. So I haven't talked specifically about Unitarian principles, but I have, right? And I just wanted to walk away from this letting you know that you matter, right? You're seen, you're valued, and I'm here for you, and this community is here for you. It's an incredible community, and we're so lucky to have each other. Thanks.